Welcome back to the anatomy of a Minecraft model, lecture number 1, models and textures. Before the break we took a look on how we could set up a renderer class, a model with different parts where we added a box, and it looked ugly, no texture whatsoever. So let's take a look on how we can do that. But, well, here we go. 10 by 10 by 10 was our box here, and that's the important part we'll have to remember right now. But what we're going to do now is head over here. This is Photoshop here. You can use other things as well if you want to, like GIMP or Paint.net if you want free things there. So what I'm going to do here is create a new file basically, and I want it to be 64 in width and 32 in height. We can have different sizes than these, but then we will have to do some special things, and we'll see that later on in this lecture here. But to start with, I want a texture sheet that is 64 pixels wide and 32 pixels high. And here we go. Pretty small, but we can zoom in, and here we go. Let's see. There you go. So now I'm going to create a texture for for this this model. So how do we do that? Well, I'm not going to teach you how to work with image editing softwares, because that obviously depends on what you're working with. So I'm just going to teach you how the texture should look like in the end, and well, that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick a gray color here of some sort. There you go. What we want to do is a square to start with. We want a square that is 10 by 10 pixels. The reason why is because, well, all of these are 10 there. We don't have to bother about well, which dimension is what in the texture, just because they are all the same. We'll see later on how we do if they are different. But what we want to do is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. That's a 10 by 10 pixel square. So I'm just going to fill that up like so. And just to make sure, I just copied that and asked it how big was that. Well, it's 10 by 10, so that's nice, right? And well, just to show that everything works properly, what I'm going to do is add a small border to this thing here, like so. So I'm just going to select the border here. Oops, that was too big. And remove that. There you go. Like so, another color there. Right. And just to spice it up a bit, I'm just going to add some noise to it, and that's going to make it like that. So, so instead of being completely clean, it's well, you have scrambled the colors a bit, just to make it look a bit better. There you go. But this is wrong. This is not how we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to move this thing here. And if I move it like so, well, we can just put it somewhere else. And the way we want this to work is that we put it here. So we have a 10 width of space here, just because this is 10 in, well, all the sizes. It's a 10 by 10 by 10 box. Oops, that's not the thing I want. The thing I want is another one. So the others, oops, I moved it too far. There you go. So it was 11, now it's 10, there you go. And now if I place another one, I'm going to place it here, another one there. So as you can see, I'm going to make all the sides being the same. There you go. So this is how you make a texture for a 10 by 10 by 10 box. So why do we do it like this? Well, each of these squares here are going to represent one side. The reason why all of them are 10 by 10 by 10 is because, well, all the dimensions, well, in all the dimensions the size is 10. If that weren't the case, we would have to keep in mind which dimension, well, in which dimension it's 10, in which it's like 4, which is 3, and so on. But we'll take a look on that later. So what we have here is a way for it to sort of wrap this around the model itself. If we put it like this, it sort of, if you like cut out a paper die out of paper obviously, and then you fold it together and you get the die, you get like a little block. That's sort of how it works. But well, you can't really do that. If this would be on paper, you wouldn't be able to fold this together to a die. But it's the same. It works in the same way. obviously being rendered by code, so therefore, well, one can move these around. So we have 6 different sides, and if they are all the same size, then we put them like these. So we have 2 here on top, in the middle there, and then we have 1 there, 1 there, 1 there, and 1 there. But we'll take a further look on that later on, because we're going to work with more boxes, of course. So now it's a matter of saving this, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm doing that in the correct one. No, now you get a sneak peek of how it's going to look like in the next lecture. But, well, we'll have to see that later, and that's a sneak peek of what it's going to look like when it's done. But what we're going to head over here is into source here, into assets, into example, textures, models, and here we want to save droid, like so. Okay? Because that's what we're referring to in the code. So if we head over to the code again and go to the rendering part here, we have the droid, like so. Sweet. And we have 10 by 10 by 10 by 10 by 10 there, and that's why we rendered it like we did, or well, drew the image like we did. So let's start Minecraft now and see how that is applied to our box there. There you go. Much better. Of course all the sides looks the same, but that's because we made it all the same. And if you don't trust me that, well, each and every square in the texture sheet, if we take a look here, represents one side, then you will have to try it yourself. If you don't trust me on this one, why would you trust me when I teach you things here? So what we have here is just the different sides, and they are represented by the different textures there. And yes, because we put them like we do, it's being wrapped around it properly. If we would like remove this part here and put it on top here, it wouldn't work properly. It wouldn't render that side properly. So we have to put it in this shape, and that's just how it is. But like I said, we'll take a further look on what all these sizes are. At the moment, it's simple because we have a cube. All the sides are of the same size. Okay. So why did it grab the texture from where it did? Well, usually we need to specify where it should get the texture from. Here we go, 0, 0. But if I didn't, it obviously use 0 as default. And by adding 0, 0 here, it means that the x coordinate in the texture, the source x is 0, and the source y is 0 as well. But then you might say, well, we don't have anything at 0, 0. Well, yeah, but it starts up here, and then we have this blank, and, you know, this is at 0 in y, and this is at 0 in x, and that's why we have 0, 0, even though at 0, 0 we don't really have anything at all. But like I said, that is how we make the 2D texture, so it can wrap that around a 3D model. But like I also said, we'll see more of that later. Right, so what we want to do now is add something more, because obviously just a single box is, well, a bit dull. So what I'm going to do is add a model renderer pillars there, new model renderer, this, and then 0 and 20. Okay, so if I have 20 here, right, what does that mean? Well, that's the source y, and then I head over to here, so 20. How big is this? Well, each of these are 10 by 10. That means that that's 10, which is 20 together, and therefore it's going to try to grab the texture from here. Okay, that's the first thing. We'll make the texture in just a second. We head back to the code, and what we want to do this time is actually to add multiple boxes to this model renderer. Like I said, when we have a model renderer, which we have plenty of in a model base, then we can add a box, but we can add multiple boxes to it if we want to. So what I'm going to do here is for int x equals -1, x is less than or equals to 1, x plus equals to 2, like that. There we go. And then I want to do the same thing for y. Oops, for int y equals -1, y is less than 1, and then I increase that with 2. So what we get here is sort of 4 different values. First of all, we get x as -1 and then x as +1, and for each of those we get y as -1 and y as +1. So what we're going to get is sort of 4 different corners. What I want to do with this is to place 4 different tiny pillars on top of this main block. So we have the main block, and in the corners on the top of it we have small blocks as well, and that's exactly what I want to do. But I'm going to add all of these boxes to the same model renderer. We'll see how that's going to work. Pillars dot add box, like so. There we go. And I'm going to split these up in 2, like so. There we go. What size should these have? Well, I'm going to give them 2 by 2 by 2, like that. And what now? Well, if we use the negative half rule, we would go with -1, -1, -1, right? And that's going to place this box here, the box we're adding, at the same location as the model renderer. Okay, seems legit. However, we have 4 different boxes. We don't want all of them at the same place as the model renderer. Then they will just be at the same location. That's not what we want. So what we want is, first of all, use the negative rule, so their center is put in the center of the model renderer. So first we're sort of moving them together to the model renderer, but then we want to spread them out properly. But since we're put them in the center to start with, when we spread them out, we're going to spread out the centers, and therefore if we do something like this, we're going to move it either 4 in the positive direction or 4 in the negative direction, depending on what x is. But if we didn't do -1 here, it wouldn't move the center, it would move the edge, and therefore if we moved in one direction, it wouldn't be moved as much as in the opposite. And does that mean that we always want to use -1/2 like that? No, of course not. It depends on where we want the box to be placed compared to the model renderer. And we'll see further examples later on. But I want to do the same thing here. Plus, well, I shouldn't call it y, I should call it c, shouldn't I? Because that's the c dimension there, so I'm just going to rename this here. It's simpler to just do that manually. There we go. Okay. So that's the x, that's the y, and that's the c value. And as you can see, we're adding multiple ones to the same thing there. But if we add them at -1, where will they go? Sorry, in y value, where will they go? Well, they go sort of inside the main box. Shouldn't they do that? Because, well, you know, we have a 2 by 2 by 2 box, and we're placing that at -1, and then it goes to +2, so from, well, to +1, sorry. So we have that around the center of the model, and that's the same thing we have here, but with something bigger. We won't really see the pillars, right? Well, the coordinates here, they are compared to where the model renderer itself is. So if the model renderer called pillars is somewhere else entirely, then the boxes will not be inside the main thing here. So what we want to do is move the actual pillars thingy there, and we've seen that before. That's the set rotation point, and what I want to set that to is 0, -6, that's going to move it upwards, and then 0. So we do set it at -1. There you go. The box itself is set to -1, but that's -1 compared to where the model renderer itself is. So if we move the model renderer up -6, and then we move it up -1, so we move it up even one further for the box itself, then the box's center point is going to be, well, at the same position as the model renderer, but the model renderer called pillars is going to be much higher up than the one called main there. So that's going to make it so it's placed on top. The final part that we want to do is parts.add pillars. Oops, I can't even spell pillars. There you go, like that. And then if we head back to Photoshop or whatever software you're using, we want to add this texture here. And how am I supposed to do that? Well, we start at 0, 20, so that's here somewhere, and it's 2 by 2 by 2, and we have seen how we make well, cube textures. They are the simplest versions. So what we want to do is a 2 by 2 there, a 2 by 2 there. So I'm just marking where I want it to be. A 2 by 2 there, there, a fifth one there, and then the last one up there. So there you go. So we have that shape there. I'm just going to paint some color there, make some noise to it, and there we go. Now it's just a matter of saving it. Here we go. Right. So now we should see that we add another model renderer, even though that model render consists of multiple boxes. And if we go back to Eclipse here, we see that we add them like so, but we also move the model renderer itself. So when we add a box, the location of that box is, well, relative to the model renderer itself. So for the main one, when we add a box, -5, -5, -5 means that we 5 pixels away and then 5 pixels away in the other direction, because it's 10, you know. And that's around the model renderer. Now the main one happens to be at 0, 0, 0, which, well, basically means that the box itself is going to be the very middle of the whole model, whereas, well, these are in the middle as well when it comes to the y dimension, -1 there, but we're moving it upwards with 6 pixels by moving the model renderer itself, and that's going to affect all the boxes of that model renderer. Let's take a look. Right, so let's take a look how it works. There you go. So now we have 4 small pillars there on top, which are all 2 by 2 by 2, but we only use one model renderer for them, so we group them together. One thing worth noting in that, of course, is, well, what can we do with the model renderer itself? Well, one of those things are setting where we get the texture from. So if we wanted these pillars to have different textures, then we wouldn't be able to, well, just add 4 boxes inside one model renderer. Then we would have to have multiple model renderers, because, well, we would grab the texture, then we could define where those would grab the texture. At the moment we have one model renderer, we add 4 boxes to it, so they basically, the model renderer consists of multiple boxes and they all use the texture there. We'll see more differences between well, modifying the model renderer itself and the boxes a bit later on. There you go, floating like that. Okay, in the next step we'll see an example of a few different things. We'll see an example of different sizes of the texture sheet, and we'll also see an example on non-cube blocks. So we will see cuboids, or well, cuboids which are not blocks. Okay, not blocks, not cubes, sorry. So what I want to do here is model renderer top equals new model renderer, like this. There you go. And what I want to give it is this, and also the texture, well, where in the texture it is, right? Okay. So I want to add this on the top of everything, on the top of well, the pillars. So it's going to be like a lid of some sort. Top.add box, like that. And what I'm going to do here is set the size. The size should be the same when it comes to sort of the base area, because, well, if I put it on top of the pillars, then it has to be big enough to fit the pillars, but I don't want it to be bigger nor smaller. So therefore I put 10 there. Oops, 10, that's how you spell 10. -5, -5, like so. And I'm going to do well, I think 4 pixels here is good. So I don't want another full block to be on top. I want to make it thinner. It shouldn't be as high. So therefore I set it as 4, and that's just how I want it to be. I just used the -half thing in there as well. And that means that this box that we're adding is going to be, well, it's going to have its center where the model renderer is. So we're not using as with the pillars, that we have the model renderer in one location, and then we have the pillars around the model renderer itself. Remember, we have a model renderer there, even though that one itself doesn't render us anything. That's just controlling the different boxes that we do have. So if I add it like this, then I obviously need to place it at the top. So what I want to do is just top.set rotation point, like so, and then 0, -9, and 0. So we keep it in the middle of everything, like so, but we move it upwards, so we set it to -9. The last part is of course parts.add, and then the top, like so. Right, so we do pretty much what we did up here for the main one. We create this here with a specific texture there. We add the box, set the rotation point, and then add it to the list of parts. But this time we don't have a cube. This side here is different. We just have it 4 pixels high rather than 10, and we want to move everything upwards, and therefore we move the model renderer. We don't move the box, we move the model renderer, and the box will of course follow along. How do we do this texture then? How do we make it? Well, first of all, we might see, well, we have 0.20, 0.22 on both of these. That's not a mistake. That's just, I put it like that to demonstrate one thing. And the second thing, well, we don't have room for anything more in sort of this size. We can't really fit it anywhere. So we might want to make this texture sheet a bit bigger. And in Photoshop you can like go to image and canvas size to change the canvas, and if we change this to pixels, we'll see that it's currently 64 by 32. And when it comes to the size of a texture sheet for models, well, like I said, the default is 64 by 32, but all the different sizes that are, well, that are valid have to be something that is a power of 2. So for instance, 2 is valid, 4 is valid, 8, 16, 32, we have 32 there, 64 is the next one, 32 multiplied by 2 equals 64, then we can multiply 64 by 2, get 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2096, and I don't know what the next is. So we need to keep that in mind, but we can use anything we want. We can use 2 by 2 we want to for the texture sheet, even though we're not going to be able to fit a lot in there. We're not even going to fit, well, one by one texture properly, but we can totally do that. But what I want to do now is keep 64 there as the width. I think that's good enough, and I'm going to set the height to 64 as well, like that. So as you can see now, we got a bit more space, because look at this, we can scroll it down a bit. There you go. But well, by changing the size of the texture sheet, I need to do something in the code. I need to head up here and do that in the beginning, what I'm going to do. If you do it in the end, it's not going to work. So before you add any like boxes and model renderers, we need to say, well, the texture height equals 64. So we need to tell it how big is the texture sheet that we're working with, because otherwise it's going to think, oh right, you just increase the resolution and then everything is going to go bananas. But we say, alright, the texture height equals 64. And we can do the same thing for the width, but since the default value is 64 for the width and 32 for the height, if we're using any of those values, we can, well, simply ignore them altogether. But just for completeness, I'm going to add both here. So the texture width, set that to 64, the texture height to 64 as well, and therefore all of these things, when they are being rendered, can utilize the texture properly. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is, well, I'm going to copy this thing here, okay? So I get it like that. Right. Okay, what's going on? Well, let's assume that we're going to add another 10 by 10 by 10 block. That's not the case. We want a 10 by 4 by 10. But let's assume that. Then it's going to look like this one here that I'm blinking with now. So where should we put that? Well, we defined an eclipse here in the code that it's going to be at 0.20. Okay. That one is also at 0.20, right? Yes, it is. So why does this work? Well, the first box here in the upper left corner, the square, is always blank. It's blank like that. it should be blank like this for this bigger one. So since this is so much bigger than those pillars here, we can fit them in the same location, just because the smaller texture fits in the blank spot of the bigger one. It's totally fine. There's no bad things. Well, nothing is bad by doing this. It's totally fine, because this part here is not being used by that bigger texture, the box we have there. So therefore we can just have another small texture there if we want to. We don't have to do it like this, as of course, but it's totally possible, just because these corners here are not being used by the model when we render it. So therefore we can use the same coordinate there if we want to, and just do it like that. Right. However, the block we want to add is not 10 by 10 by 10. That was the main block. The top block is 10 by 4 by 10. So where should we change that? Well, since it is the y value that we want to decrease, what we want to do is decrease it here. Boom. And I'm going to move this part up, like so. There you go. So now the height here is 4, like so. That's 4. This here is still 10 by 10, because that's the top and the bottom, these two. And then these 4 are the sides of the whole thing. And they are still 10 in width, because, well, the two remaining dimensions still have the size of 10. So we still haven't distinguished all the differences, just because, well, the x is still 10 and c is still 10 as well, so they are the same, and that's why we get squares here, and why all of these are the same width. But we'll take a look later on in this lecture, in the end of this lecture, when we will have a cuboid where all the different sizes are different, how we make a texture for that. But now we have the y set to 4, and therefore this height here is 4 pixels, whereas this is 10, and that is 10 by 10 still. Let's save this here, PNG, go to Droid there and save it. Okay, head over to Eclipse and start the whole thing. Right, it's just a matter of starting here, and we'll take a look. There you go, a little hat there, and oh look, it's starting to look like this thing. You probably forgot about that. The icon. So yeah, I know the icon is terrible, but later on in lecture 3 we'll take a look on how we can render the proper model as a part of the item here, so we don't have to have an icon for it. Right. So why does this work? Well, we just add a box, and the box has 4 in height and 10 by 10 in the other directions, basically, and we, well, made the texture to work with that. Sweet. I don't know why it looks like this, but you know, it totally works. There you go. So the next step, what's the next step? We obviously have multiple steps here. Well, we're going to take a look on how it works when we have a box that has multiple all the dimensions being different in size. We're going to have a block that is 8 by 5 by 1, so obviously 8 is not equals to 5, and yeah, you know. But we're also going to take a look on how we can work with rotations, and also the difference between setting the size, well, the location as a part of the model renderer and as a part of the box. So let's go. Model renderer side here. I'm going to put something on the side, so not as a part of this side of this whole thing, but like sort of like a sign on the side of the whole thing. And that's going to be a new model renderer, this 034. So that's just where in the texture I want. As you can see, I'm always using 0 here, and that's just because I'm placing everything on top of each other. That's not required at all, so if we wanted to put something here, then we would just use something else. I'm going to use that in lecture 2, but it's not really important. It's just where you find the texture, like so. Okay, the next thing is, of course, to add a box. Side dot add box. And worth noting, there are actually multiple ways of adding a box. If we take a look, we have 3 here. This is the one we're using is the basic one, where we just define the size and the you know, the position, whereas these you define a few other things, which in my opinion, seems a bit ridiculous, but you can do it. These are basically the only things we need. Let's see, so there we have 3, and then we have 3 here as well. And the size, like I said, is going to be 8, 5, and 1. But up here we obviously need 1, 2, 3. That is as well. So let's go with the negative half rule here. -4, -2.5. We have to tell it that it's a float as well. But what do we add here? Well, basically I want to put something on the side of this model. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, okay, we can go with the negative half rule here as well. We take a look on why this is not going to work with what we want later on. But for now, okay, it's fine. So take a look on this number there. -0.5 is not what we're going to stick with later on. Okay, okay, so far so good. Then the next thing I want to do is set a rotation point. Okay, 0, 0. Okay, so we have the proper coordinate there. But, well, what we've done now, we want to put it on the side, right? So the value I want now is basically 5.5, just to move it to the edge. And that's just a number I prepared before, so it should be working properly. So we just set a box. We use the negative half rule in all dimensions for now. For now, that is. Okay, we're going to change that value later. And then we just move it to the edge, right? We move it all the way to the edge, and, well, so we get it on the side. Otherwise, we would see the whole thing in the middle of, you know, the entity, the model there, and that's not what we want. The last part is, of course, to refer to parts and add the side like so. Okay, nice. What's the next step? Well, we have this texture 8 by 5 by 1. How do we make the texture for that? We have seen how we work with cubes. They are easy. Everything is just the same size. We have seen how we modify the height, but now all of them are different. Okay, we specified 34, and 34 is basically 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 4. So that means that we're starting here, or there, sorry. Right, so what I want to do now is the following. Okay, let's see, is that 5 pixels high? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I miscounted, I think. No, there you go, 5. So the reason why I have 5 here is obviously the Y value. As we saw here before, 4 pixels high, well, we have 4 pixels high here just because we used 4 here in Eclipse. There, 4 there. So now when we use 5 here as the Y value, then the height we want to work with here is 5. Okay, but I've only made one thing here, just one tiny thing. It's just 1 pixel wide. The reason why it's just 1 pixel wide is because of the following. Let's open Eclipse again. Boom, 1. So the C value is 1, and therefore we have a 5 by 1 little texture here. Nothing more than that. Then what I'm going to do is use a brighter color just to distinguish these things. And then what I want to do is still have 5 in height, of course, and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Boom. Okay. Why? Well, the next part, well, 8. We have the x value there, or the x size rather, is 8. Therefore, the next part is 8 there in width, but it's 5 in height still, because the y value is obviously still 5. So it's easy. The y value is always the height of this block here, or well, this big rectangle there. So first of all, the C part there, then the X part, and then the C part again, and then the X part. So what we want to do is, well, if we want the back and front and so on to look exactly the same, which, well, this ugly thing is doing at the moment, we can just copy that and put it right next to there. Sweet. So as you can see, if we sort of would fold this together to sort of a I don't know, a border of a rectangle sort of, then well, yeah, like a border of a block, whatever, then what we get is that these big parts here, they will be facing each other, so they will be on the opposite end of each other, and these two will also be on the opposite end of each other, and that's sort of how it works. So before we've just seen that all of these have the same width. We have seen 10 there, 10 there, 10 there, and finally 10 there as well. And the reason why we have it like that is obviously because we before have had x they've got x and c as the same thing, but now when they are different, we need to, well, know which order they come in, and basically we go with c, x, there you go, c again, and then x. So what's next? Well, as we've seen, here we have a 10 by 10 like so, well, 10 by 10 like so, and therefore it's 10 in height here. I just left 1 pixel here in height to, well, as a space here, and the reason why is because we're using the c value as the height up here. So if we're using that as the height up there, then we should obviously use x as the width, and therefore we do that. Boom. So that's the one of those sides, and then we just add in the next side right next to it like so. So what we have here is that each side that we add is a combination of 2 dimensions. It doesn't really show up well here. We have each and everything is just 10 by 10, and that's because, well, we have 2 sides here that share these two 10 by 10. We have 2 sides which shares these two 10 by 10, and then we have 2 sides which shares these 2 which also are 10 by 10. But when we head over here, we'll see that we will have 2 that are 8 by 5. If we take a look, that's these 2. Sorry, that one and that one. So those are 8 by 5. Then, if we go back, we will see that we will have 2 that are 5 by 1. That's these 2. Oops. That one and that one. And finally, we will see that we will have 2 that are 1 by 8. And if we go back, we'll see that these, well, those are the ones up here, like that. And that's how we do it. So if we change things around, so we would have 8 here, 8 there, and 5 there, we would obviously have to change the texture. But now, since we have 8 and 5, it should look like this. I'm just going to noise it so it looks a bit better there. So there you go. And as you can see here, we still have a square up there, and we still have a square up there, and that's always the case. We always have squares at the ends, like so. And so if we don't have that, we might have done something wrong. And that's just how it is, because here we have the the c value here, and that's defining the height here. And the space that is left here is obviously the width of this thing, which is obviously also the height up there, sorry. So therefore, if we don't have squares, 2 empty squares in the end here, whatever size they are, then we have done something wrong. Let's save this. Up there. Okay, so let's run this and take a look. Okay, here we go. Do you see something? There you go. Look at that. It's on the edge. And, well, as we can see, the darker borders are on the edges, and that's just because that's how we define it, the large area in front, using the brighter texture. And if we take a look, that's exactly what we have defined. There we go. So that's how you make the textures. You have to make sure that they wrap around properly, and they do that if we draw them as as they are supposed to be drawn, basically. And when we do that for cubes, it's very simple. We just add it like so. But here we had an example where all the sides were different, and therefore we'll have to keep in mind how that works. But we're not done yet. I was speaking about rotations, right? That's totally right. Okay, so what do we want to do here? Well, I want one of these sides on each side, basically, of the model, so I want to have 4. And what I'm going to do here is, well, loop through a rotation here. So as long as r is less than math dot pi times 2. So here we're using radians, so we're not using we're using angles, but sorry, we're not using degrees. I was about to say. So a full circle is not 360 degrees, it's 2 times pi. And if you don't know radians, it might be a good idea to at least read up on that a bit. But it's basically a different way of measuring angles, which is much better in many cases, but the only bad part, I guess, is that it's a bit tricky to get around if you're used to like the normal degrees. So that's what we're going to do here. So we loop as long as r goes from 0 to 2 pi, which is one full lap in a circle, which means that we're going to go all the way around this entity here, like so. We don't need that. We can do it like that. There you go. So it won't place another one at the first side again, because obviously we can loop this forever. So we can do like that. It's going to go two times around the whole thing, and therefore we're going to place two sides, two of these side boxes here at each side of the entity. But we don't need that, so just loop like that. And finally, what we want to do is say r should go up plus equals to math.pi times 2. So that's obviously 90 degrees if you convert that to degrees. There you go. Okay. How do we apply this rotation? Well, it's fairly simple. We do that to the model renderer. So the model renderer can define the textures, the position, and the rotation, where boxes can just be in a specific position and a specific size compared to the model renderer. So here we go. We have these 3 different ones in the different directions, and I'm going to use rotate angle Y, and I'm going to set that to R. There we go. Let's run. And like I said before, that's negative half rule that we used in all dimensions for this block is not going to be good enough, because now we'll see a problem. Okay, we can see, well, a mess. It should be one on each side. Shouldn't be placed like that. So what's going on with that? Like, we have the one properly, and then one is just sticking out of there, like 90 degrees compared to it, or well, half pi if you want to. So why is that? Well, what we have here is we're adding the boxes to be in the very center of the model renderer. Then we rotate the model renderer, and what that means is that we rotate everything that the model renderer contains. So that means that we rotate each and every box in it, and we also rotate a few other things. We'll take a look on that in the next lecture. So if we rotate these things, they are going to rotate, but they are going to rotate around the model renderer. If they're center, this box is in the center, just because we have -4, we have 8, we have -2.5, we have 5, we have -0.5, and we have 1 there. So it's the negative half rule. So that means the box is in the center of the model renderer, and therefore, if we rotate the model renderer, the box is going to be rotated around the model renderer, and therefore it's just going to rotate around its own axis. Yes, because the box is placed in the center of the model renderer itself. However, if we place it a bit away from the center, when we rotate it, it's obviously still going to rotate around the model renderer. But when it does so, if it's away from it, it's going to rotate in a circle around it, and therefore also change location. And that's what we want in this case. Sometimes when you want to rotate it, you will only want to rotate it around its own axis, and then we use the negative half rule. We're going to see that in the next lecture when we make some animations. But for now, what I want to do is change these things around. So instead of having it like that, I'm going to put this at 0, 0, 0. So the model renderer itself for the sides are going to be on in the exact same location as the main one. Look at that, it's the same. So they are going to be in the same location. But when I rotate it, it's obviously going to rotate the boxes. So at the moment I'm just going to have 4 boxes that are inside the main block and are being rotated. But if I move these, remember I have positive 5.5 here that I removed. If I then increase this by 5.5, then I get 5 there. And what that is going to do is that I have the model renderer inside the main block, but then I put the box itself 5 pixels out, which is going to be enough to place it outside the whole thing. When I rotate it, it's going to rotate around the model render itself, and therefore, since it's 5 pixels away from the center, it's always going to be 5 pixels away from the center, and therefore it's going to rotate around the whole rotated around the whole model. Here we go. So now we should see that it's placing itself on each and every side like that. There we go. And the reason why it works now is because the center of the rotation is in the middle of everything. Therefore, when we rotate something around it, it's also going to change position compared to where it were before. If, however, the box itself has its center at the same position as the model renderer, then when we rotate it, it's going to rotate it still around the model renderer, but also around its own axis, because those are placed in the same spot. So there we go. Now we get them like this. This doesn't mean that the negative half rule is wrong when we want to rotate things. It just depends on how we want it to look. In this case, we want it to move as well. We don't want to rotate it in the same position. We want to rotate it around the entity itself, and therefore one of these blocks on each sides. So there we go. We have a main block. We have 4 different pillars, which is just one model renderer, but 4 different boxes. We have the top there, and we have these sides that we rotate around it like that. And that's pretty much it for today. Next time we'll take a look on animations, but before we end this, I'm going to go through quickly what we've done today. We started with just registering a renderer, or well, we did so in the beginning at least, and we should have seen this before, but it goes like this. So we do rendering registry.register entity rendering handler, and then we have the class of our entity, entity_droid.class, and then we have a new instance of this render droid. That's the one that's going to render it all. And we obviously have to create that ourselves, and this is a method from that renderer. It's not the whole class. It's the render droid method. So what we want to do is prepare to render by adding a new translation layer, the push matrix there, which we remove in the end by cleaning it up like doing pop matrix. Then what we want to do there is make sure that we render it at the proper location. The translate there, we translate it compared to the coordinate that we want to draw it on, so X, Y, and Z. We modify the scale a bit just to make sure that the model works like vanilla models. Not necessary, but if we didn't, then we would have to modify how we make our model. Then we bind the texture and draw the model like so. We just give it a size we want to draw it with, like that. Right. How do we do the model? Well, the model works like this. We have, it contains of model renderer parts, and we want to render them all. As you can see in the render method there, I just loop through all the parts that we do have and render them with the given multiplication value, so we get them at the correct size. And if we have a texture which is not the default size, then we set so in the beginning, texture width equals 64 and texture height equals 64. Remember that it has to be multiple of 2, so it can be like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on, but it can't be like 42. And there where the 3 dots are, we have to create the different model renderers that are basically the different parts of the model itself. And if we take a look on how we can do that, we saw this simple one. We do model renderer main equals new model renderer. We give it the model itself as well as where we want to get it from the texture. We can see how we made a texture down there in the bottom of the slide there. And then we want to add a cuboid to the to the model renderer, and we do so by doing main.addBox -5, -5, -5, and then 10, 10, 10. So that's going to be put a cube in the very middle. We just add that to parts in the end, so it's going to be rendered. Then we can also add multiple boxes to the model renderer, and it's just a matter of doing pillars.addBox. We want to move the whole pillars thingy upwards, and therefore we set the position to -6 of the model renderer like that. And when we add the boxes, we don't want to add them all in the center, but we add them out in the edges, and that's exactly what we do there with the loops and the values of the loops. Here I actually use Y for the inner loops, in the loop, where in the lecture used C. It doesn't matter, of course. And here we go with a something that is not a cube. We do the same things, but here we have the size 10, 4, 10. We move the whole top thingy upwards. There we go, -9 in set rotation point, and therefore we have a texture like the one you can see in the bottom right corner. You can see that the height of the bottom there is just 4 rather than 10. Or, well, obviously it's bigger here. It has been zoomed in. Then we have something that is different in all dimensions, so we have something that is 8, 5, 1 here, and there's a lot of colors here to show what all these directions are. So for X we have 8 pixels, for Y we have 5 pixels, and for Z we have 1, like so. And what we can see now is that the small tiny parts there marked with blue, that's the C one, and those are 1 pixel each. The height of everything is the Y one, the 5 pixels there, those are the purple ones, and then we can see the big and wide parts there that are the orange ones that are represented by the X value. We can also see those on top there. We just have 2 of those edges right next to each other. So this is how it's set up. A lot of things to remember which one goes where, but some practice helps with that part as well. But like we saw when we worked with cubes, it was much easier because then we could just say, alright, 10 by 10 by 10 all over the place. But yeah, there you go. Then we have the next thing here, and since the box here that we're adding is not well in the center of the model renderer, when we rotate the model renderer using side.rotate angle y equals, well, a rotation there, then what we'll get is that it's not only rotating around its own axis to change its rotation, but it's rotating around the model renderer's position, and therefore it's going to move. And that was exactly what we wanted now, because we wanted to move around the entity itself. And since the model renderer called side was in the center of the entity, or in the center of the main blocks rather, then when we rotated it, it rotated it around the actual block there and placed itself on the different sides, like so. And that's pretty much it for today. I hope you liked it. We have the question and exercises document, the questions, so you can see if you have learned everything. It's some questions about the relation between model base, model renderer, and model box, for instance, and a few other ones. And then we have answers to them in the end, so you can check if you're correct. There's also an exercise that you can do to you know, to practice a bit more. A possible solution to that will be in the end of the document, and there are further explorations if you want to go a bit further, try something more advanced that hasn't been described in the lecture itself. This has been the Anatomy of a Micro Model, lecture number 1, Models and Textures. I've been VSWE, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Next time we'll talk about animation, so we're going to continue with this model and see how we can animate it. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.